Hi, I'm Gan Sharma. I'm the Director for Business Development at Asigra, and I'm very happy to be sitting with Robert Novak, a super blogger in the IT world, very high followership. Very, very happy to be with you here, Robert, today. Robert, as many of you know, is part of a group of IT bloggers from Tech Field Day. A very, very well-known group of bloggers, and excited to have you here, Robert.
Thank you, Gan. It's an honor to be here. I'm happy to be able to talk to you about some of the stuff that we're both a little bit obsessed with.
You know, Robert, let me just kick this off by asking you something that is in the minds of nearly anybody who's in IT today. You know, we're talking about the cloud. It's a word that means 1,000 things to 1,000 people. It's here. It's the power of an idea that's here to stay, obviously. But there are some customers, end users in IT who are afraid of it. Some of them embrace it. Some of them love it. Some of them are wondering what it is about. So why don't I just get started and ask you, what's your take on cloud philosophically from an IT perspective? What are your thoughts, and what is this thing?
That's a pretty good question. And nobody has come up with one answer, because I don't think there is one simple answer to this. And that's what causes a lot of the problems and a lot of the power of the concept of cloud computing, cloud storage, cloud security, cloud management. The idea is to get away from an on-premises, on-site operation, whatever operation that may be, whether that's your web servers, whether that's your database, your email. You know, in some senses, we've been doing cloud computing for years and years before it even had that name. So a lot of the fear around it may be mismatched definitions. Mm-hmm. Some of it is not understanding the limitations of the cloud. And every time you see a news article about some cloud provider either going out of business or having an outage or changing their prices or their terms of service, that pushes some decisions and some judgment calls back on the client, the customer, to figure out what they're going to do about this and whether they've planned for it. Right. Now, we see a few companies that are the poster children for cloud. Netflix is one of them. Right. And the way Netflix was able to make such successful use of the cloud was they built what they call a greenfield environment. There was nothing initially that they had to replicate into the cloud other than functionality. There weren't processes, right. There weren't programs. They could build everything from scratch. Build it to fail, because when you're in the cloud, you don't have control over the platform, somebody else does. Right. And there's always natural disasters, technological disasters, hardware failures that you have to be prepared for, because they do happen. Right. So they had, I won't say they had an easy time of it, but they definitely had the ability to start from ground zero and build something with the limitations and the power of cloud technology in mind. When you have companies that have an existing environment, mm-hmm. and they're trying to replicate this, what they have in, say, one data center in the middle of the desert, into the cloud, they may not have the resources or the experience, the expertise to plan that replication, that rebuilding, to take into account the limitations, the problems they're going to face, and the power, the scalability, all of the benefits to cloud infrastructure.
That's great, Robert. What do you think companies must consider to tap into the power of the cloud and yet avoid some of the obvious pitfalls that you mentioned? Mm-hmm. You know, if you were to give them a sort of a top 3 checklist, or a top 2 or a top 5, what mm-hmm. would that be? What would you advise an average company considering moving their IT into the cloud to think about or to be prepared for?
I would say the first thing is redundancy and replication. You need to be able to work in different availability zones, as Amazon calls them, different locations, and possibly even different cloud providers, because you may get into a situation where one provider says, we have this new policy, you can't store this kind of data, or we have this new policy, we'll give you 2 nines of availability, and you need to be able to adjust to that, but you might want to still use them because they're affordable, they're pervasive. So being able to work in different availability zones and different providers, it's one of the hardest things to do in cloud infrastructure, but it's also the most critical to being able to move with the flow of the technology.
That's excellent. And I'm sure that people watching what you're saying here will take that into consideration as they plan to put themselves and their IT and their business into the cloud. Mm-hmm. Let me just shift gears a little bit, Robert, and similar to the cloud is this notion of big data. A lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people want to leverage it. Some of them understand it very well, some don't. Some are experimenting with it. Just as you articulated what the cloud is and what it means to companies running IT, give us your sort of high-level view of what big data is, how it is changing the world of business, and how should people prepare for it?
Okay. Well, big data is a lot like the cloud. There's lots of definitions. We've been doing it for longer than we've had that buzzword, and there are so many ways to do it wrong.
Right.
And there are pitfalls, there are capacity issues you have to take into account, there's data sources. But big data is here to stay, just like cloud infrastructure is here to stay. And a big part of it is determining what information you have and what you need to do with it. But the catch to this is you may not know what you need to do with it. Most companies don't. Right. When they're getting started or when they're first building out an analytics infrastructure. So the important thing is to get your data together into either a data warehouse, a Hadoop cluster, some other infrastructure, and be prepared to work on it. So you'll come into that taking into account what the business needs, your business analyst, business development, marketing, sales, what they need to get out of it, what your finance team has to get out of it, and work on ways to build that from the raw data. And you're going to find some things, there's open source products, there's the Apache Hadoop product, there's a number of other pieces that are built on top of it or around it. I think I saw a diagram recently of 100 different open source products that you could throw into a blender and end up with a very powerful, very confusing, unmanageable environment. But if you build up from there, if you start with a data warehouse, a data lake as they're calling it now, a data puddle, and then build up, add pieces to do what you need with them, whether they're commercial products, open source products, or even in-house products. Some companies I've worked with have had engineers on staff who will build their own software on top of open source products, and sometimes open source them themselves, so they end up building more of the ecosystem. But it takes a lot of investigation, exploration, making mistakes, and determining what you can do with the data to make your big data platform not a cost center, but a business driver.
But a business driver. Yep. And that probably is the common link between things like, the cloud world and the big data world. They are not magic bullets, if I hear you. They cannot solve bad business practices. You have to be engaged with your customer, have a business vision, and these are engines that can help you drive that in a meaningful way. And I guess that's what is common between the two.
Right. The old saying I remember was that logic is a tool that you use to build bigger and deeper holes. But if the hole is in the wrong place, no amount of logic is going to get you around that. And that's a lot of what there is to cloud infrastructure, to big data. You can have all of the compute power, all of the storage, all of the networking you could possibly dream of, but if you're looking at the wrong numbers, if you're providing the wrong information, inaccurate, imprecise, or downright incorrect information, you're not getting what you need to out of either of those technologies.
So you'll have great technology, which is completely useless.
Right.
That being the point.
Yeah, a race car with square wheels.
There you go. There you go.